Is a free market bad for the sustainable use of resources? That's what many people assume. But in fact, the opposite is true. The data show that historically the more economic freedom a country has, the better its environmental stewardship. Surprised? A little bit of reflection will help us understand why this is true. First of all, market-based economies have higher incomes, and people with higher incomes tend to be more concerned about environmental stewardship. But beyond that, the key features of a free market, including private property, profit-seeking, and market prices, all tend to incentivize the sustainable use of resources. Consider the case of wildlife conservation. Are we worried about chickens going extinct or cattle? Of course not. Private ownership encourages ranchers to manage their herds in ways that provide a steady stream of income over time. If their animals were available for anyone to take at will, it'd be a different story. Consider the fate of the American buffalo, or bison, which 150 years ago was hunted almost to the point of extinction. The wild bison herds belong to everyone, which is another way of saying they belong to no one in particular. Unless, of course, you shot one. Then it was yours. Even hunters at the time knew that they were killing too many too fast. But what could they do to stop it? As one of the thousands of buffalo hunters put it, "It wasn't long after I got into the game that I began to realize that the end for the buffalo was in sight. I resolved to get my share." It was only through the efforts of private individuals that the bison was ultimately saved. One buffalo hunter captured 5 calves and raised them for profit. 30 years later, that herd, now about 75 animals, was sold to Scotty Phillips, a cattle rancher from South Dakota who proceeded to create the first enclosed buffalo preserve in the United States as a tourist attraction. He named it Buffalo Park. The bison you see roaming Yellowstone Park are almost all descended from Scotty Phillips' herd. This story is repeating itself today in South Africa, where entrepreneurs have played a huge part in bringing another species back from the brink of extinction, the white rhino. Although the South African government had created national parks to protect it and international agreements prohibited the sale of rhino horn, illegal hunting continued to take a huge toll on the rhino population. For poachers, it was the same old story. Better get yours while you can. Finally, the government recognized that it needed a new approach, and in 1991 began permitting private ownership. Private owners spent top dollar to acquire rhinos at government auctions and recoup their investment by a combination of trophy hunting, sales of animals to others, and most of all, through wildlife tourism. They invest heavily in security measures, and as a result, the poaching rate on private game reserves is 5 times lower than in the national parks. Today, more than half of white rhinos are in private reserves, and their population is growing while the population of white rhinos on government land continues to decline. Of course, the link between effective conservation and private ownership is not just limited to wildlife. From the perspective of a business, every resource used is an expense, and none want to use more than necessary. A company that has to pay for the electricity it uses is not going to keep the lights on when the factory is closed. A building contractor isn't going to purchase 12-foot lengths of lumber to build an 8-foot deck. That kind of waste isn't just environmentally destructive, it's expensive. If, in spite of this, a particular resource is becoming relatively scarce over time, then its price goes up, and entrepreneurs respond by finding new sources of supply or developing substitutes for it. The end result of all of this is an economy that continues to grow even as our exploitation of resources declines. As Andrew McAfee has documented in his recent book, we've been making more from less. For some time now, we've been using less minerals, less farmland, creating less pollution, while production of goods and services has steadily increased. But you may ask, what about resources for which private ownership is impractical? For example, air that we breathe. As long as companies are permitted to dispose of their waste into the air for free, why wouldn't they? And you'd be right. This is a case where government policy is necessary. But even in this case, the type of policy matters. An administrative solution imposed on companies by government command and control can be counterproductive. Such policies lack the flexibility necessary to take advantage of local knowledge and entrepreneurial creativity. The best regulations apply the lesson of the bison. They seek to create opportunities for individual enterprise, not prohibit them. A good example of this can be found in our approach to controlling acid rain in the mid-1990s. The government gave each electric utility a limited allowance to emit sulfur dioxide, the chemical that causes acid rain. These allowances were a form of property. If you didn't use them, you could sell them to another utility or even to an environmental nonprofit. And if you needed more, you could buy them from another utility. This restored the link between resource use and a company's bottom line. Utilities that reduced pollution could increase their revenue from the sale of unused allowances, but those who polluted beyond their initial allowance had increased costs. The end result was a reduction in sulfur dioxide that was greater than the government required, but at a cost much lower than predicted. This is an example of what a well-designed incentive-based regulation can accomplish. The lesson provided by these examples is clear. Effective environmental stewardship allows people to benefit from their own conservation efforts and holds them accountable when they fail to do so. A free market economy based on private ownership, the profit motive, and market prices is not the root cause of poor environmental stewardship. It's the solution.